on 1 second. All right, pursuant to Governor Baker's March 12, 2020 orders suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law and the governor's March 23rd, 2020 order imposing strict limitations on the number of people that may gather in one place. This meeting of the Yarmouth Water Resources Advisory Committee meeting is being conducted via remote participation. All votes during this meeting will need to be conducted by roll call. No in-person attendance will be permitted, but every effort will be made to ensure the public can adequately access and participate in the proceedings as provided for in the order. Public participation will be permitted by allowing members of the public to join this meeting via Zoom. Mr. Chairman, you can just take a roll call quote to enter into quorum.
Okay. George Perkins.
Yeah.
Lee Rowley.
Here.
Tom Barron. No, Tom Roach reached out, said he wouldn't be here. Spiro.
Here.
John DeLizzo. Tom Durkin. And myself. So the problem is we only have a quorum.
You look cold. Should I get you a blanket?
Kyle, do we want to just run for the benefit of the public? Do we just want to run through the agenda anyway so that they can be informed of where we're at?
Yeah, what's the issue? Do we not have quorum?
We only have 4, I believe.
Yeah, well, you guys just can't vote on anything yet, but you can still go through the agenda items then.
All right, we'll work on that. I don't see Ed on the meeting yet either. I believe he's going to explain the debt service. Is that correct?
Ed's on the call.
He is, okay. All right, so DHY status update, would that be Dave or Jeff?
Well, Dave could start and I'll fill in if that's good with Dave.
Sure. The David Young, CDM Smith, the DHY subgroup made up of the 3 towns, administrators, DPW staff, board of selectmen representatives, continue to meet monthly. Actually, we've had a meeting a couple weeks ago, an additional one, just trying to get caught up to date. I think as just about everyone here knows, the Yarmouth and Dennis boards of selectmen have both voted unanimously to support implementing the DHY and supporting that at the annual town meeting this spring. Harwich selectmen so far have voted to put a town meeting article on that on their annual town meeting warrant. They are still in the process of trying to update some of their alternatives in their comprehensive wastewater management plan, looking at some revised flows and some other options, working with staff. So that continues to be done. Each of the communities on their own are looking at different ways to re-educate the public on DHY, since a lot of, we had a lot of momentum just about a year ago leading into the spring 2020 town meeting. And then everything was essentially put on hold regarding that after the 3-town February meeting on DHY. So right now, everything is being geared up to go to the town meetings. Currently, Yarmouth is scheduled for the last week of April, and the other 2 towns are scheduled for the first week of May. As you also know, here in Yarmouth, you also have the town ballot election, where you have to continue following up on your 2 articles from last fall's town meeting, which will be discussed later, I guess, probably under public outreach. So we are also in the process of updating all the costs for DHY that have been presented. We hope to complete that this week. There's a DHY subgroup meeting this Friday. We hope to present those costs. Again, we're updating based on the few minor comments that were received as part of the third-party peer review by Weston and Sampson. some other items that have changed within different programs, minor tweaks to collection systems, those types of things. You may recall at one point we were looking at some shared systems to convey to the treatment plant site in Dennis. Right now, it's all set up for each community would directly connect on their own. So we're shifting the cost between collection and shared on that, just to make it all consistent. But most importantly, we're taking all the costs that have been presented previously in midpoint year 2022 to now projecting the midpoint of construction to be the end of the year 2024. So we're escalating costs forward to reflect that as well. So obviously costs are not going down. Bid climate has been all over the place in the COVID times. So again, we'll hope to have that out by the end of this week. So be happy to answer any other questions that people may have on DHY, or Jeff, anything you want to add in.
I don't have too much to add, David. You did a great job with an overview. As soon as we get those costs, we'll certainly distribute that out to the committee, where make sure you have that well in advance of the next meeting, so we can continue to have dialogue about that. One other thing that I would add, and I don't think it's specifically DHY related, but it is kind of wastewater update related. And we do have a signed contract with CDM Smith for survey work for phase 1. I know the committee's been very interested in moving that along, and that's in process now, as well as some design work associated with a Mass DOT project for Route 28, North Main Street, Old Main Street, and the Bass River Bridge. So those are elements of the Yarmouth plan, not DHY specifically, but the Yarmouth plan that are moving forward. So that's just a little bit of information for the committee.
Okay, next thing is on the agenda is a debt service payment plan discussion. I believe that's where Ed will come in.
Hi, Kyle. Can you put up the document when you have a chance? I think it was distributed to everyone.
Which
Hi,
document?
this is Ed Santillo, Finance Director.
Which document?
Wastewater refunding and funding plan.
Okay. Give me 1 second.
Or you can share the screen, or allow me to share the screen. I can do it if that's helpful.
Yeah, you should be able to share the screen right now if you can, but I'll also try to locate it in the meantime.
Okay. I have it up myself, so I'll just share the screen. Thanks.
All right. That's good.
Can you all see this memo that was written to Bob Lawton on the 16th?
Yes.
Yes, we can, Ed.
Nice. I see Jeff nodding his head. Thank you. Thank you very much. All right. We're waiting to actually put together the debt service schedule once we have the numbers from CDM Smith. One of the things that was just an adjustment to the last set of debt schedules that you all might have seen is the fact that 0% financing was applied to all of the expenses related to the project, but that 0% financing can only be applied to the construction and not to the design and engineering. So CDM Smith, in addition to updating its costs because of the delays in the project or the delays getting started with the project, is also going to be splitting out the design and engineering from the construction so that we can apply an interest rate toward those numbers. So the next time we meet, we can actually share the actual funding schedule. And I'm not sure if you probably haven't heard, but we got some good news in phase 2 of the Cape Cod Energy Park, which has us getting around $12.6 million over the course of 20 years for that phase of the project. and we're looking at phases 3 and 4 to actually help provide some additional revenue to this project as well. So the first piece is, I know there was some thought about taking money from the septic facility, the reserves from the septic facility, and looking to try to combine 3 different units to do that. There's a much simpler way to do that. We had a septic host fee mechanism that was in place, and what I want to do is have the selectmen vote to restart that. That will generate additional free cash, and as you'll see in the next slides, any free cash that we're generating from any of these items would then be put in their entirety into the funding for the wastewater project. The second thing that we'd like to do for the fall town meeting would be to add an article to set up a wastewater enterprise fund. That fund would receive the free cash contributions from all of the other funds, and rather than putting those monies into a wastewater capital fund or reserve fund, which requires 2/3 vote, any use of the money that is in the wastewater enterprise fund would only require a majority vote. So again, much simpler than the other process that we had been looking at putting in place previously. And the drivers of free cash would, of course, be the short-term rental money that we're keeping track of, and we're putting that into a separate revenue account so we can know exactly what those dollars are based on the splits the state is giving us. And whether or not we use the short-term rental money as a way to balance the budget for fiscal year 2022, that amount of revenue in its entirety can still be put into the wastewater enterprise fund based on the use of free cash. The other piece that would go right into the wastewater enterprise fund with a vote at town meeting based on the allocation of free cash would be to take the septic host money, put that into the wastewater enterprise fund. We are now, finally after decades, selling foreclosed property that the property that's of no benefit to the town, so that we can actually start generating revenue, new growth, as well as additional free cash that would go into the fund. And then we're looking at this idea, and this is not baked in stone, but taking 20% of the new growth that's greater than $400,000 and putting that into the wastewater enterprise fund. Obviously, we can't take all of the new growth that might happen as we're going on every year because we've got other things that we need to fund besides wastewater. The deposit into the WEP or spending in other ways would be consist of the funding that comes into the wastewater infrastructure fund. So that would be the diversion of the CPA money that would go into the wastewater enterprise fund. Any dollars that we might receive from the Cape Cod Water Protection Collaborative, if that's given to us directly, would go into the fund, or if it's used to pay down debt service or to reduce the cost by 25% or the capital cost by 25% from the debt, then that would go in those particular funds. And then any betterments that we might generate from this project would be deposited directly into the WEP as those payments are made. So would the sewer rates, and any dollars from grants or other funds would be also put into the wastewater fund. And then we have a small amount, and we've used the balance of the septic betterment fund that we had left over, about $240,000, $60,000 that we had in our funding structure for the time that the betterment program went to Barnstable County. We finally allocated those to wastewater, and then any new septic betterment loan payments, which we just have a small amount that will be generated, will also go into the wastewater enterprise fund. So we're looking to move immediately with the septic host fee, and then start moving the dollars into the wastewater enterprise fund starting at the fall town meeting. Again, I think there were some concerns about, hey, if we use the short-term rental money to balance the FY 2020 budget, then somehow the entire amount of the short-term rental money would not be put into the wastewater enterprise fund. That would not be the case. And then at some point, maybe we would do special legislation to put it into the wastewater enterprise fund directly. But at this point in time, that's not needed if the selectmen will approve this policy or something like this policy. Are there any questions? So we try to simplify the process, not have a lot of complicated votes, not try to merge three departments that really don't have the same accounting structure and the same operational model into one enterprise fund. We don't really need that in order to take the advantage of everything that all of the ideas that people have been putting forth for the last 9 years as it relates to the project. So I know Jeff knows that we've been, and so does Dave Young, we've been working for 9 years since the no vote to try to come up with alternative revenue sources to fund at least the first phase of the project. And I think we're going to be very successful at doing that.
Ed, I have a question. I know you're not specific about some of these numbers, but you sound like you're fairly comfortable that the plan will adequately cover our costs.
Previous 124 Charles.
I'm sorry, Kurt. We have the plan. It's in the spreadsheet. We have all the revenue sources estimated. You know, whether some are being hit more than others, it's a portfolio of revenues. So that if one doesn't come in, but the other one comes in higher, I think we're in good shape in order to meet the needs. And we have funding over and above what's needed in phase one. So there's funding that would contribute towards the additional phases, just like the previous plan as well. And we've actually detailed the revenue from each of the individual funding sources. We need to get agreement from the selectmen that they're willing to go forward with phase two of the Cape Cod Energy Park. And that will, combined with phase one, would be, $13 million over a 20-year period. It's going to result in cutting down some trees. But as a part of our negotiating with the winner of the RFP, we indicated that we'll use money towards tree planting in Yarmouth to supplement that. And the tree, we're talking about 13,000. A forest of like 13,000 acres would be relieved from the plan that we're going to use for utilizing that land for solar. So. I'm very confident that we can fund this. We've been, like I said, we've been working on this for 9 years since the no vote that we had when wastewater was initially offered as something that would hit the tax rate. So we've been working this for a while.
Do you have an idea what the new numbers are that Dave is going to present on Friday? Or are you still working off the original numbers that Rich had worked previously?
I'm working off the original numbers, but there is a year-over-year cushion that I hope the new numbers do not blow through, and that the interest rates or the interest on the design and engineering, hopefully that won't blow through those numbers. But I think we're okay at this point in time. We might get some surprise number, and then we'll have to dig in deeper and figure out some other revenue sources.
Well, from my perspective,
we have to be very entrepreneurial.
And from my perspective, I'm not going to speak for the committee, but I believe there's some flexibility built into phase one that if we do get caught a bit short for some unforeseen reason, that we could adjust phase one a little bit to help with that. Yeah. Anybody else have any comments on the?
I think.
Go ahead. Sorry, Ed.
No, go right ahead. But as soon as Dave has his numbers, we'll be ready to release those numbers. The other thing we need to do, though, and that wasn't done with the last plan, is we have a modeling software system that we can use to identify the proposed betterments and then the user fees and then the potential capital surcharge on top of the user fees. I think we have to go and talk to the users and, just kind of test whether those are affordable given some of the money that they've already had to put into, funds that the DEP may have forced them to put aside for wastewater, just to make sure that there's not going to be major pushback from the folks on Route 28. So we had some systems conversions, so I need to update that model. That model goes against our assessing database and our water database to generate proposed numbers for those charges. So what you might see after we get the numbers from Dave may also need some outreach and some polishing once we actually talk to the folks that will be in phase one and see how those dollars would impact them and make sure that they're comfortable with those dollars, to some degree. Any increases maybe not comfortable. We just don't want to, drive any businesses out of business because we've increased the fund so high. And I don't believe that was the case previously, and I don't believe that's the case now. But we just want to test those types of things.
Yeah, my personal sense from what the exercises we've gone through too, is that the money that most places would pay to have an on-site solution probably dwarfs what it's going to cost them to join, with a central system. So I would think for most people, it would probably be to their benefit, number one, and number two, even if they're borrowing the money through us as opposed to the bank, chances are our rates will be a lot better. It's not like we're asking them to pay everything up front.
Right. And, I don't want to be mysterious about this. Can you see the spreadsheet?
Yes.
On your screen?
Yes.
That's just, yeah. So, this is not, kind of a vapor situation where we don't have any numbers. Again, we want to test these numbers. These are, in many cases, actuals, and we tried to break them out so it wasn't, numbers that were in certain buckets. But this is what we're working on, and this is the key column. Do we have at the end of the year, as we accumulate these dollars after paying debt service, enough money? Is this column negative at all? If it's not negative at all, we're in good shape. And as you can see at the end of the project, at the end of the debt service for this particular set of borrowings, I think we have some cushion. So I'm assuming that Dave's numbers won't exceed these numbers, and that that the interest portion of the design and engineering won't blow through these numbers. And these numbers are lower at the beginning, but that's our pre-funding step, as we've been working on for several years. So, I'm comfortable at this point in time until somebody makes me uncomfortable.
And I believe you said you're
And we
basing
tried
it
to,
on a 1% borrowing rate?
we don't. This is all based on a 0% borrowing rate.
0%. Okay,
That
but
was the assumptions that were made last.
okay. But it does not
So
include.
we need to increase it.
Yep.
I'm sorry. I'm stepping on you. I apologize for that.
No, the problem is you keep cutting out, Ed, so we're only hearing part of what you say.
That's why we need to replace our phone system.
Yeah, I know you say that at every meeting. The principal forgiveness potential from the SRF is also not included, is it? Because we don't know what that is. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So that could be a great bonus to help us.
That's
also.
column O.
Okay. All
That
right,
would be a bonus for the next set of phases.
Yeah, very good. All right. Does anybody else have any questions of Ed or the financing plan?
Yeah, Kurt, Lee Rowley here. Ed, The $1.1 million on the short-term rental, we're only going to get a percentage of that? Is that the way it's figured in right now?
No, it's 100%.
It's 100%. Okay. But in the early stages, are they going to dedicate 100% on that? Or are they planning to use that for catching up on our budgets, the town budget?
So what happens at the end of the, so right now we're predicting a very low level of local receipts. We're at currently 83% of where we were for FY20, which is lower than where we were for FY19. So for this budget, we're being very conservative. However, we budgeted at a really worst case scenario by removing all of the capital, and we had millions of dollars in capital, and we lowered our estimated receipts. So as long as we stay above 70% in our estimated receipts, and we can control our spending, what we're going to do is we're going to generate what's called free cash, and the free cash is a result of either getting more revenue than you may have budgeted for, or not spending as much money as you thought you would. So I believe we're going to get free cash that will allow us to put 100% or $1.1 million utilizing free cash into our wastewater enterprise fund, whether or not we use this money to balance the budget. So what we're doing is we're saying for FY22, for example, hey, we might need to, based on the Cape Tech number, use $400,000 to balance the budget. We're going to say, hey, we're going to utilize $400,000 from short-term rentals for the Department of Revenue, for S&P, to say that's how we're balancing the budget. We're hoping that after the epidemic is under control, that we'll actually not have to use any of that money, that none of that money will actually have to be used to balance the budget. But even if it isn't, maybe other revenue sources will come up that will increase the number that we have from a free cash standpoint, and we can still use free cash for this purpose. Now, that means that we can't use free cash for other purposes if we sequester all of this money for short-term rentals. So that would be where it makes it difficult on the town. But if the town's policy is to use 100% of the short-term rentals money for wastewater, then the first $1.1 million of free cash would be used to actually fund wastewater.
Okay.
Anything else, Lee?
No, I'm all set.
Anybody else have any questions or comments?
You just remind us all, particularly those who are new to the meetings, how far into the project $135 million gets us?
I believe that's the DHY plant, piping, pumps, and our phase one. That sound right, Jeff and Dave?
Yes,
Yes.
that pays for Yarmouth's phase one collection system, and then for you to convey that wastewater over to the DHY plant located in Dennis and the effluent recharge, your portions of those.
Thanks.
We all set on that discussion? Okay, thank you, Ed. We'll move on to the golf course recharge impacts.
Mr. Chairman,
Chair,
just so
if
you
I could
know,
just start.
I see John Delicio here, so you may have a quorum now.
Okay, very good.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, if I could just start by saying that David Young and myself have been meeting with Scott Gilmore, had some very productive meetings about revenues and cost impacts associated with the recharge at Bass River Golf. And we're getting very close to some numbers. Maybe in your next meeting or so, we can share some of those with you. I think we have a meeting with Scott just to refine those a little bit later this week. So I just want to report that that is good progress we are making. I think we have talked about a CDM Smith memo that you had previously with regards to the cost of developing the recharge infrastructure, but recently a memo was distributed to the committee about just kind of a final overview with regards to the Bass River Golf Course and nitrogen. So with that said, I'll turn it over to David Young to talk a little bit more about that, if you could, David.
Yeah, this is a detailed memo that explains the nitrogen loading within the Bass River Golf Course. You may recall the Bass River Watershed, or I should say the Watershed, encompasses a very large area. You know, it goes from the Nantucket Sound all the way up to North Route 6A. And it's about a 50-50 split between Yarmouth and Dennis. A few more percentage points in Yarmouth, but roughly equal. So it's a very large watershed, one of the largest on the Cape. So what we did is we went through, because the questions had come up about not only the nitrogen removal in order to meet the total mass daily loads for that were defined in the Massachusetts Estuaries Project reports, but also what the impact was then from the effluent recharge at the Bass River Golf Course. Now, keep in mind that recharge is to be used by DHY in the initial phases, but if DHY never came about, it would be used by the town of Yarmouth in the latter phases. So either way, that site has been identified for effluent recharge. So sort of, there's a lot of details. I don't know if you've had a chance to go through the memo, but I'll focus on the last page, essentially, table 2, which is the full summary of that. And it shows, you know, the inputs, what needed to be removed. You can see existing conditions for the whole Bass River watershed, as well as we focused as well on the what's known as the Bass River Middle Subwatershed, which is where the golf course is located. We looked at what the existing conditions were from nitrogen coming from septic systems, and then what's known as the threshold, what you need to target and remove to get to that level. So it shows what the removals are needed. We also then looked at through fertilizer education, what we believe of 25% reduction through that. Same with the stormwater credit, we took a 25% for that because the town's implementing best management practices for all their stormwater programs moving forward. And so through the sewers, proposed sewer systems areas in Yarmouth and in Dennis. So this watershed, we had to encompass the removals in both of the communities. Shows that clearly we're removing sufficient nitrogen in the overall watershed. And we're also removing sufficient nitrogen for the prior to adding in the effluent at the Bass River Golf Course. Now that effluent is treated, you know, we're taking 35 to 50 parts of nitrogen in septic system effluent and bringing that down to 3 parts. So it's a very high level of treatment that would then be applied in leaching chambers. We showed, I think, a cross section of that when we went through the memo previously. So it's a subsurface underneath the fairways of the golf course, of which the town's looking to make improvements to the surface once that's put back in place. So that 3 parts has to be accounted for, and the hydrogeologic modeling and studies that have been done, we feel pretty confident that on average 2 million gallons a day could be recharged at that site. Obviously that's not going to happen overnight, so there's plenty of time to through the monitoring well network system that will be in place prior to discharging 1 gallon to monitor how the whole system is reacting, making sure that any of the modeling that's been done and any of these nutrient balances that have been put forth are reacting as expected, so that, you know, if something should happen that's out of the ordinary or out of what's being projected, that appropriate actions could be taken. But we feel that in doing that, that if you look at the bottom line, we come very close. Well, we're still removing significantly more nitrogen than we need to. You can see minus 40 parts in the overall watershed. And in that sub watershed, we're very close. And with so many variables, we feel very confident that we would meet the nutrient removal requirements, in part because this doesn't take into account any of the improved water quality that would occur from this nitrogen removal as the tide cycles go up and down the flushing within the river. This is just a straight math exercise without any of the water quality modeling improvements being incorporated into that. So again, you know, I know a lot of people were back on the December call putting forth math, thinking that they were the doomsday scenario. That's anything but the case. And in fact, one thing that we haven't taken account for really either is this water would be in the groundwater table, and in part, some would also get into Laban's Pond, which is the irrigation source water for the golf course. So applying, as we found over at the Bayberry Hills course, applying a very low dose of nitrogen to the golf course in that irrigation water actually helps offset some of the commercial fertilizer that would normally be applied to the course through the golf course superintendent. So, and that's pretty typical of most courses that use reclaimed water. So that's another variable that would be very beneficial to the golf course as well as nitrogen removal. So with that, Kara, can you also pull up, maybe it'd be helpful just for them to see the golf course picture and where the effluent recharge areas would be located.
Kyle, if it's okay, I'll share my screen.
Go for it.
This is a little small, but if you look at, you know, if you're familiar with the course, there's really the two areas. Laban's Pond is that water body in the middle. So there's sets of effluent recharge that are a little difficult to see, but this is the new master plan that the town has been working with their golf course architect to develop, that they would like to propose to incorporate once the effluent recharge leaching fields have been constructed. So if you look at the rectangles that are shown in red dashed lines underneath, there's 4 sets of 3 leaching fields, so 12 fields in total that would be used to apply it. So there's 6 on what I refer to the west side, which is to the bottom of this figure. And then there'd be 6 to the east side or to the top of this figure. So it's evenly distributing the flow around the site. And again, this portion of the Bass River also has very good flushing. So again, as we improve the water quality in this lower portion, it helps with the water quality up in the northern sections, at least up to Route 6. And Route 6, as we've discussed in the past, is actually one of the bottlenecks to the system. That's why you see the lesser quality water in the river north of Route 6. And you may recall the 3 towns, particularly Yarmouth and Dennis, have asked the Mass Department of Transportation whenever they schedule work on the Route 6 bridges to consider widening them back to their original width, which would be essentially double what the existing width is. There's also already some operational or maintenance issues that need to be addressed on the support systems of those bridges. So hopefully, at some point, it doesn't need to be done in the next 5 to 10 years, but there will need to be some significant work on those bridges at some point, and the towns have asked to be part of that discussion and potentially even chip in money to help widen those bridges because it's cost effective and helps minimize some of the sewering potentially to the north side. So overall, I think it's a good program. Incorporates a lot of components. A lot of people in Yarmouth excited about the potential for seeing some significant improvements at that golf course, which would help. As Jeff indicated, we've been meeting with golf course staff to look at what the impacts to the revenue during that. Essentially would lose one golf season, but there's things being looked at of trying to share tee times with potentially courses in Dennis and Harwich, as well as making sure that lost revenues are incorporated into the project cost for doing that project. So with that, I'd be happy to answer questions.
Have your numbers on the watershed as far as nitrogen loading been, was that part of the peer review that was done?
No, it was not.
It was just the
I did send it
design
to,
aspects?
pardon?
It was just the design aspects and costing that was peer reviewed?
Yes.
Okay.
I have sent, because we did a similar memo for the Swan Pond River watershed over in Dennis. Both of those memos we've sent to Brian Dudley at the Mass Department of Environmental Protection. And I know he's been reviewing them because he's been getting questions from different folks. I haven't heard back from him. We'll check with him, but I know he had looked at Swan Pond, didn't have any questions on that. I'm not sure where he stands in reviewing the one for Bass River, which we issued back on February 4th.
And is there a sense of the delta between restoration of the golf course as is versus the master plan so that the Golf Enterprise Committee and others understand what they would be on the hook for if they decide they want to go master plan as opposed to just restoration? I know it's probably not your problem, but I think everybody should be aware of that as they move forward.
Yeah, no, Jeff and I actually presented that memo that we had presented to you folks to the Golf Enterprise Committee. And they were the ones who selected the master plan, not us. And so they are in the process, and we presented both to the selectmen as well. And they're waiting for the Golf Enterprise Committee, I believe, to come back with a proposed plan to pay for that differential.
Any questions on that from anybody? Okay, next, we have the town meeting articles and ballot questions, discussion and a potential vote. I know we haven't had great information up to as of right now, but maybe Jeff could go through quickly through what they basically are upcoming.
Yeah, certainly. For town meeting, there's one article. It's the DHY agreement. It's the same article, the same language in Dennis and Harwich and in Yarmouth. And so it is something that we've been talking about with the DHY subcommittee for a number of months now. And thank you, Kyle, for putting that on the screen. Hopefully everybody can see that. But this is the language that's being discussed. There's a couple of things that are highlighted in yellow on this explanation that still need to be filled in, mostly as it relates to costs. But the language will be the same in all three communities. And as was mentioned during the update, all three communities have voted to put this on their spring warrant. So that's where that stands. We are looking to do some public outreach, and we'll talk about that as number 8 on your agenda. But as part of that, we'd like to include the different entities that have endorsed or are supporting this particular article. very targeted, kind of mailings that go out. And so we've been talking about what groups to reach out to as far as getting endorsement. But with that said, for this particular agenda item on your article, I think this is an opportunity for a vote to support this particular article at town meeting, as well as the two ballot questions. The two ballot questions are, one is for the WIF and one is for the CPA exemption. As the committee knows, those were supported at the November town meeting by the voters, but it needs to also go to the ballot for a townwide vote on those two elements. And so those are the items that are for the ballot. The date for the ballot, I believe, is May 18th. And the date for town meeting is currently April 27th, but there is some discussion of that potentially moving. At this point, it is the charter calls for the last Tuesday in April for town meeting. And so that's what we are expecting. Happy to answer any questions you might have, but those are the elements for both town meeting as well as the ballot questions.
Any comments or questions? I would like to have more of our membership. I don't know how anybody else feels, membership of the committee, but I would like to have more people here if we're going to take any further votes to endorse and support these articles. I personally believe we should, but I'll defer to the committee, however all of you feel who are here.
I agree, and I think you should circulate the articles before we vote on them.
Yeah, I thought the same thing in my conversations with people. I think we should have better language so we feel more comfortable ourselves in what we're potentially endorsing. So at least we know what they are. By the time we schedule the next meeting, I hopefully will have language out to everybody so they better understand just exactly what we're going to be supporting. Okay, land use controls update. Kyle, is Kathy on for that?
I believe she is, yes.
Yes, I'm here, Kurt.
Okay.
I think we did have a staff meeting, and I think maybe if I could ask Dave to give a little summary of what the land use controls are meant to do. He gave a nice summary to the staff, which was very helpful. It sounds as though all of these regulations governing these things will be in the sewer rules and regulations and not something that would be included in the zoning bylaws. So that was something that kind of came out of our last meeting. But if Dave could just give that little summary, it would be great.
Sure. As you may recall, there are 5 criteria that need to be met in order for the town to qualify for 0% state revolving fund loan. And one of those criteria is that you have what's known as land use controls in place. What that means is that you have regulations in place that help you manage to the wastewater flow projections that you have put forth in your approved comprehensive wastewater management plan. Now, some people interpret that to mean no net growth increase. That's not the case. You can put flow allowances in to allow for certain areas, such as commercial development or whatever, even if, low income housing, whatever it may be, you can put those flow allowances in, and as long as you've incorporated that into your plan, then you just need those regulations in place in order to manage to that flow. The whole reason for this is DEP does not want to fund at 0% interest a program, have it installed, and then have a big development come in after it's been installed, which sucks up more than the capacity that it was designed for. They want the community to manage to that. Some people are for growth, some people are for blowing up the bridges. This is just a plan. It's not meant to be, your zoning tool or anything like that. It's a plan in your toolbox that you have to manage to the flow that you have projected to meet your nutrient removal requirements. So as Kathy indicated, we drafted an example of land use controls based off 2 or 3 other communities that we've worked with. And those land use controls have been approved by DEP. They also have to be approved by the State Housing Authority. And what they do is they divide out the amount of flow in a certain sewer service area. They list that specific flow, and then you are limited to the flow in that area. There are means listed in the controls for moving flow from one sewer service area to another if you wanted to, or for accepting flow from outside a sewer service area that hadn't been identified for whatever reasons. You know, obviously there's a point in time, and yet it's a 40-year program, so things will change. So you need some flexibility. But again, it's to control that flow. So, you know, we put the draft forward, and Kathy has pulled together a team of town staff to then try and look at how best that might fit into use within the town of Yarmouth.
I think the intent of looking at it now is just to get an idea of if people started asking questions at town meeting, that we would be able to have some answers for them, that we are working on land use controls, which would limit development to a certain extent in town up to the build out analysis that was done. Many of you may recall that community development had done a detailed build out analysis and actually increased the sewer allocation so that we would have a little bit more wiggle room with regard to redevelopment, especially in phase 1, which is our main commercial corridor along Route 28 and on South Shore Drive. So I think there's still a lot of questions on what's the best way to do that. But we wanted to be able to indicate to people that kind of what you have now is what you would continue to have. But as we move forward with the sewer and water regulations, when you increase your flow, there's going to be a process you're going to need to go through in order to get approval for that, so that we can monitor it and make sure that we're not going over our build out analysis.
Yeah, you know, I think that's one of the concerns that some people have, is that every 2-bedroom house will become 3-bedroom, and every 3-bedroom will become 4-bedroom, and the 50-unit motel will become a 100-unit motel, and so on. And that's not the case. And I think looking at the village centers, for example, and the motel bylaws of the past, that I think that identifies a lot of where we want to do things and where we don't want to do things.
That's correct, Kurt. That's kind of what we looked at when we were looking at the analysis for the build out. We really concentrated on the 2 motel districts, HMOD1 and HMOD2, as well as the Village Centers Overlay District, and kind of made some assumptions on different properties that might get developed and how they might get developed. It doesn't mean that anyone got any type of sewer allocation based on that build out analysis, but it kind of gave us an idea of the volume that we might be contributing to the regional wastewater treatment facility. It was a kind of a tricky thing. You didn't want to go too high, because then that would increase Yarmouth's percentage in Yarmouth's costs to the regional facility. But then, of course, we didn't want to be too low, because we want this to be an economic driver as well as an environmental program.
Okay, do we have anything else on that? Any comments from anybody?
The only question I had, Kurt, for Kathy is, in the event that in the future, the town, or let's say zoning or planning, decides to change some of the plans in terms of higher intensity development or lower intensity development, I assume that this plan will be taken into consideration. Will the future sewer program commission or committee or have a voice on some of these changes that may occur?
I think with anything, it's always best to have a team effort on those things. I kind of see that right now, Yarmouth has very liberal zoning. We're allowing a lot of different types of development that has potential for larger wastewater generation. I see it more as maybe being a little bit of a difference in the future of saying, okay, maybe we've built out to a certain percent. We might want to hone in on some locations where we want to maintain that liberal zoning and maybe take it away from other places to kind of control some growth that way. But I don't see that being something that we would look at right away. Probably be something we'd look at in the future. But you're right, we can't just keep adding liberal zoning without downsizing it somewhere.
And Lee, what I would add to that is in the sewer use regulations as the current draft that we're working on, it's very, very early in that process, has our sewer commissioners as the Board of Selectmen. So really to approve additional flow, that would fall within their purview. Now we have to kind of work through those details of what that would look like. Is there a certain level of flow approval that can be done at the staff level and our water or sewer division head would approve that, or there's some larger increments of flow that they would want to go before the full Board of Selectmen as sewer commissioners, maybe getting input from the Water Resource Advisory Committee as far as a recommendation on those things. Those are the types of procedures we still need to set up and work through. So those are things we're talking through, and that's really all part of the land use controls, at least as far as they relate to the sewer regulations.
Well, Jeff, on that note, is there any consideration for the selectmen setting up a separate water and sewer commission in the future, or have they not discussed this, or are they going to try and maintain control under the Board of Selectmen?
That level of detail, I don't think has been fully vetted. That's something that we'll need to talk about further, especially as we start to set up DHY commissioners and kind of what that looks like as well. So this is coming to be a potentially very busy year as far as developing policies and how the town's going to move forward with those components. But nothing's really been discussed too much on that. But really we have a blank slate here as far as moving forward. There's a number of different ways to do it. I can tell you that in my previous experience, many boards of selectmen like to retain that control. It is a policy issue. They don't want to spend a lot of time on the topic, but they do want to be able to have a say on that. For instance, many of the other towns, their sewer commissioners have been the Board of Selectmen versus a elected board. You could go also in that direction, but I don't think that's really where that's headed necessarily. They may want to set up something that's appointed. You already have that with the Water Resource Advisory Committee. Maybe they would be willing to give you more authority, but all those things need to be worked through.
Okay. The other thing that I was thinking about is once we put a main line down Route 28, there could be some of these hotels, once they connect in, they may have space available from where their old septic system or wastewater system was to expand the number of rooms that they have. How has this been taken into consideration through the planning process about in terms of total flow, and how would the town deal with having the hotels get larger in order to balance the flows?
Well, essentially, that's what we're talking about right now. It's the land use controls. How would you, you're essentially going to be grandfathered, generally speaking, is kind of the current thought right now with what you have. But how would you add? And that's the land use controls. That's the sewer regulations. And how that flow is doled out is something we're still working through. All those details need to be looked at. Is it simply a first come, first serve type of basis? Or is there going to be some other type of process put in place? And all those details are still to be worked out.
And I would think that, some of the zoning that we've put in place would allow some expansion, but I think generally the Title V limits that it might be already in place, lot coverage, number of parking spaces available are going to limit how much somebody could develop a particular piece of property anyways. Anybody have anything else on that? Okay, I'm gonna move on to the Friends of Bass River update.
Good afternoon, Kurt. Some of you may know in 2020, the Friends of Bass River initiated a fairly comprehensive water testing program in most of Bass River. We mirrored the MEP locations in 5 locations, and it really set a benchmark for water conditions from Mill Pond all the way down to the Uncle Freeman's Way and on the Dennis side. This year, we are in the process of partnering with the Center for Coastal Studies in Provincetown, and they're our resource for analyzing their results. And we're looking to add 4 digital data loggers that we'll be able to use in 4 more locations from the MEP findings. So that should result in some fairly important data that we'll include in our reporting. Secondly, we're on to the 4th version of our Upper Bass River Watershed Restoration Plan. That's been ongoing for a number of months, and we're making some great strides with that. A number of town department heads have been very, very useful and involved with our decision-making process. And Mill Pond is by far the worst location in the entire river. We need to reduce the nitrogen levels there by 71%. So this restoration project will certainly give us a leg up on improving that water quality, and hopefully in the near future. And finally, report that key elements of that project are culvert replacement. And we're looking at culvert replacement on North Dennis Road, which would give us significantly better flow and water exchange, and a culvert replacement on Weir Road, which is collapsing. And the town of Yarmouth has really taken a great position on that, applying for a grant to help us with that project as we sit right now. So that's what we're working on.
Very good. I was just curious about something. Does any of the water from Mill Pond flow north into the bay, or does it all leave there and go through Crab Creek, headed south?
It flows into Mill Pond and then back out through Crab Creek and into Fallons Pond. So we do get a fair amount of exchange, but it needs to be dramatically increased, Kurt.
Yeah, and if you've seen, anybody's been down there, if you see the force of the current underneath North Dennis Road at Crab Creek, it's amazing. And Rick has also pointed out how it scoured out the shore of that creek, because the velocity is so heavy because that culvert is so small, and just the removal of the railroad bridge has made a dramatic increase in some of the flushing in some of the river.
The width of Crab Creek south of the culvert was historically about 20 feet wide. It's now 58 feet wide. So that's the amount of erosion and scour we're living with there.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Kurt.
Okay, next we're up to reappointment of board members, which is basically to see who's interested in being reappointed, because the process kind of get lost in the town offices here as to who was supposed to be reappointed when. So we're basically almost all going to go up for reappointment. If we're interested, we just have to let the town know, and it sounds like we'll just get reappointed for another term. So is there anybody who is not interested, speak now or forever hold your peace.
You can also reach out to me privately if you'd rather do it that way.
Okay. Public outreach and next steps. There's a bunch of things in the works, nothing definitive yet. One of the things that's being worked on by CDM, Mark, Jeff, and a little bit by myself is a mailing for town meeting and a mailing for the ballot questions. So as those get put together, they'll be run through the committee, and everybody will be up to date on what those will be. But they're just kind of in the infant stages and being edited out right now. And then I'm trying to involve other people in the community, which could, and I want to put Rick on the spot, but the Friends of Bass River, The Board of Realtors has shown some interest, the Chamber of Commerce, obviously. I'd like to reach out to maybe the Association for the Preservation of Cape Cod and some others. So if anybody has any ideas, we'd love to hear them. And any comments would be helpful. Go ahead, Rick. I see your hand up. You're muted.
As a result of some phone calls I've received recently, and one of our vice chairs have received recently, we had calls from, I would describe as very animated citizens who have a real misunderstanding of what's going to happen with this project. They were at times quite vocal, had to pull the phone away from my ear, it was so bad, about solids floating down Bass River and 30 acres of oyster growing in the Georgetown Flats area. So it was actually very useful to me to get a sense for what some of our citizens think is going to happen here. So in a way, it's very positive because we know that we have some specific targets out there. But it was entertaining.
Yeah, I think that's important. It's easy to listen to the people that agree with you. It's listening to people that don't agree with you and, need to be further educated because, this misinformation moves so fast that it's hard to know what it is and where it is. So you can fight back against it. So yeah, we would love to do more outreach. Again, we're still stuck in COVID. So doing in-person outreach is probably not going to be on the list. Maybe we do some kind of Zoom meetings in conjunction with the selectmen or others to facilitate, maybe some question and answer sessions with people.
Mr. Chair, if you may allow me, I can provide a little more detail to the committee about, what we're generally looking at for the mailers anyway. We're looking at something that is in preparation for town meeting that is, talks a little more detail related to DHY and is probably in some ways similar to what we did in the fall that went out to the residents that, again, had a lot of information about what that looks like, the benefits to Yarmouth, so more of an educational piece that would have, some basic information, but then would also have a link to the DHY webpage if people want more information. And then a second mailer for the ballot in advance of the election, these things probably going out a week or so in advance of those two events. And at the ballot being more of a postcard, things that people might be more accustomed to seeing with regards to voting. And so that's with the detail on the two elements associated with the WIF and the CPA exemption and details sort of associated with that specific for that activity. So as people try to keep it fairly simple for people so they don't get confused between what they're looking at for a town meeting with the DHY and the Clean Waters Community Partnership Agreement, and then for the ballot specifically to the two questions. So just to kind of give the committee a general overview of what we're looking at for those two pieces for the mailer, Kurt.
Yeah, and at the DHY level, I know we've had some discussion. I don't know if it'll come together, but maybe a unified message from all three towns regarding DHY too. Okay, that's what I have. Does anybody else have any ideas or suggestions? Again, if you don't want to speak publicly, if you want to reach out to Kyle, we can put some more ideas together. But those are kind of my conversation with different people, whether they come through or not, or we want to do it. I don't know, but we'll figure that out going forward. But there will be an effort to do some outreach anyways. Okay, future meeting dates and agenda items. I think maybe prepare for town meeting and the ballot question, and maybe just keep an eye on the costing estimates and the budgets. Will probably be a key issues going forward the next few months. Anything else anybody would like to see on an agenda or discussion topic? Nothing, huh? Okay. I see we have some members from outside the committee here of the public. Would anybody like to comment? Okay, I think we have, I believe we have one set of minutes to vote on.
Tom
Anybody?
Nicanello had his hand raised.
Okay, I'm sorry, I don't see Tom. Go ahead, Tom.
Yes, good afternoon. Tom Nicanello from the most spectacular village in Cape Cod and the home of the first Rotary here in Bass River. So I'd just like to, my feelings about 730 million gallons of water being just dumped at the discharge station. You know, we're designing a system for the future, which should have been designed a long time ago. And some of the previous generations didn't take the initiative to think into the future, and yet water is the most precious commodity. And to have all those gallons just being wasted and not going back to the participants who want their nice green lawns looking good and washing their cars and all that stuff. And, you know, we're a green community. However, this process and project is only half green to me. You look at our sister state, Florida, they're doing wonderful things with their recycled water and not just dumping it somewhere where it's just gonna leach out. If you take that water and put it back to the residents, then that water leaches through and it helps all our estuaries filter out the nitrogen, which is just sitting there. I mean, we're taking the wastewater, but the nitrogen that's trapped in the soil is not going to get flushed by nature anytime quick. We're seeing less and less rain in the summertime. So the process of that nitrogen being flushed out could take many years. As you know, it gets trapped in the soil, and if it doesn't get pushed through, then it stays there and it doesn't help what we're trying to accomplish. So I don't know if the process is too far into it, but I really would think that, you know, to do the right thing for 2 or 3 generations ahead of us is going to cost money. So what's the price of clean water? What's the price of having water, right? We have situations in Florida now where they've done a 2-pipe system and the people didn't hook up are pleading to hook up to get that recycled water because the cost of water is just skyrocketed. And I know our water rates are going up, which is okay. But, you know, when we're not here and we have 2 or 3 generations to go, what's it going to be? We're still going to be dumping millions of gallons of water in a place that really is not going to do anything for anybody, right? So I know you guys have probably heard it before, but I just had to get it off my chest saying, you know, we're a green community. Let's be 100% green. So with that, I'll let you go. Thank you very much.
Thanks. I don't know if Dave wants to comment, but I believe some of that pumping back to different properties was originally considered. I think the cost aspects of it were just going to be astronomical to try and implement that.
Well, you know, I agree with Tom. I'm a strong proponent of, you know, reclaimed water, reuse. That's the reason Yarmouth, the Bayberry Hills Golf Course, is the only golf course in the state of Massachusetts that uses reclaimed water. So when we were looking for effluent recharge sites for Yarmouth, you know, one of the sites that was focused on was the Bass River Golf Course, because it's closest to the treatment plant. You can use that water. It's not direct reuse, but it is what we refer to as indirect, because you will be pulling out that same water from the groundwater table, but it still has nitrogen before hitting the Bass River. And you'll gain that benefit of nitrogen on the golf course. And that recharge also sort of, because you're putting it in that location, it'll back up the groundwater table, which feeds into, you know, and maintains a higher level of fresh water, which feeds back into your aquifer protection district, which is where your wells are. So it's an indirect use. In Dennis, we've been trying to talk up the potential for them putting in a truck washing facility to use this water for washing their vehicles and could potentially be, you know, a 3-town vehicle truck wash facility. Or encouraging, you know, some other commercial entity, whether it's FedEx or UPS or whoever it is that's constantly washing their vehicles. The difficulty is having people overcome the cost of doing some of these things. Sure, Florida has the 2-pipe system, California does, Texas does, but they are pretty well known as the water shortage states. New England doesn't have that reputation and hasn't experienced that yet to date. But anytime we can come up with sort of some low-hanging fruit or large water users that can be incorporated into the program, by all means, that's what we need to do. And I think that is what we are doing.
All right, thanks. Thank you. Any other comments from anybody? Okay, I will work on when we get more information to set up the next meeting date. Obviously, we'll let you know. And again, we were going to get onto meeting minutes. I don't think we ever voted on those, did we?
Yeah, you had 2 sets, Kurt.
We have 2 sets? Okay. Were they in separate emails? Because I remember seeing one, but I'm not sure about the other one.
They were in the same email. I did have to send out a second email to correct one
Oh,
of
I
them.
see the rack minutes and draft minutes. That would be from September and October. Is that correct, Kyle?
Yeah, I believe that's the case. It's October 22nd and
September 14th.
October 21st and September 22nd of 2020.
I got September 14th here.
Wow. Yeah. Okay, you're right about that. Sorry. Yeah, September 14th and October. Yeah, September and October is the answer.
Okay, very well. We'll work it. All right. Anybody care to make a motion to accept the September minutes?
So moved.
Okay, do I have a second?
Second,
I assume a roll call, Kyle?
Yes, sir.
Okay, George,
Aye.
Lee,
aye.
Spiro,
Aye.
John,
Aye.
Tom Durkin.
Aye.
I vote aye. Okay, we'll move on to the October minutes. Do I have a motion in a second?
So moved.
Do I have a
Second.
Second, okay. Again, roll call, George,
Aye.
Lee,
Aye.
Spiro,
Aye.
John,
Aye.
Tom Durkin.
Aye.
Myself, aye. Okay, I think we've covered everything. Motion to adjourn. Oh, Mr. Durkin, you have your hand up.
Well, just before we adjourn, I want to make an apology for being late.
I'll let it go this time.
Thank you.
Go
And
ahead.
Tom, you can watch the beginning of the meeting and it will be on YouTube. I can send you a link.
I got it. I
Okay.
will do it.
Okay, that
Make
was
a
only
motion.
comment. Go ahead, Lee.
Make a motion to adjourn.
Okay, second.
Second.
Okay. Again, roll call, George,
Aye.
Lee,
Aye.
Spiro,
Aye.
John,
Aye.
Tom Durkin,
Aye.
and myself,